Yeah, if you can't win, you should just spoil it for the winner. You know?
Yeah, I like that.
My family didn't do that. Actually, like, if one of us would lose a video game. Okay, this actually is for, what's that Mario game where you're all, like, going on a map? You're on a map, you have challenges.
Super Mario?
Mario Party.
Mario Party. Yeah. It's like you
gaming.
have that, like, winner ceremony thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
we
yeah,
all
yeah.
would just unplug the console before the winner ceremony.
Our goal on this podcast is to know Jesus better, and by the power of his Spirit, do better, so together we can be a little better. Welcome to the next version of A Little Better. I am your substitute host, Matt Sones, the Ministries lead here at Northridge. Excited to be stepping in for Brad, who's away this week. I've got Calum Shaw and Brit McCracken here. Excited to have you on the podcast. Two of our worship leaders, our Webster worship leader and our Rochester worship leader.
And we're just saying this, that we've only sang together once
Yeah.
Yeah.
in 2 years. Only once.
Well, maybe we should fix that. We should do it again more often.
Night of Worship's coming up.
Oh, yeah.
So-
Night of Worship,
That'll be another
August
thing.
25th.
Yeah.
Yep.
Be there at the Highland Bowl. It's going to be amazing. Can't wait. Praying for good weather.
Yes, me too.
So, Calum, you preached an incredible sermon. Really excited to jump into a little bit more of the content. Can you just give us a 60-second summary?
So we're in Matthew 19 and 20. And we spent a lot of time on the context for it, which is the story of the rich young ruler that leads into the parable of the vineyard workers. Now, the main crux of all of this was really kingdom economics. This sort of upside down, it doesn't make sense kingdom. And we have this interaction with the rich young ruler where Jesus is like, if you want to be mature, go sell everything you have and follow me. Which I explained, that's his call. That's what Jesus is asking him, not necessarily all of us. But the process of maturity doesn't make sense. And so when Peter and the disciples are like, well, what do we get in return? He's like, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, which is kind of ambiguous, but the really it's to do with our reward for following him and the process of following him and becoming mature. Honestly, is a painful, like tense, joy-filled, beautiful journey. That's such a paradox of when we are losing more of our identity and security, we find more of him. And the reward that we receive is becoming more like him. And in our economy, it just doesn't make sense. But in God's economy, it does. And that's what we need to have at the forefront, that we're living in primarily God's kingdom economics, not earthly.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Such a powerful message.
There's so much to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking in pre-preach that it felt like it was 3 sermons that you somehow managed to put together into one. So much really great content.
Thanks.
So I'm sure there was something else that you wanted to say that you didn't get to talk about. What did you leave on the table?
I think I touched on everything. I mean, there's so much more I probably could have gotten a lot deeper in. We didn't spend a whole lot of time in the details of the parable, but it was a story to prove a point of kingdom economics. But I use this analogy of whiskey and whiskey making.
Yeah.
Guess we're not
What
supposed
kind
to.
of whiskey are you?
Scotch. And one of the interesting things, so I use this analogy at the end about the barrel, of where a master distiller, if it sees that the initial barrel is only taking the maturity of the whiskey so far, it will either bottle it or it will go into a new cask. And that picture for us is like sometimes the environment that we're in, that needs to change so that we can become more mature. But what's interesting about whiskey is that every year of its maturation, same with like American whiskey too, it will lose 2 to 5% of its liquid every year. So to me, that's like, it continues the analogy of that we need to lose more of ourselves to gain the best version of what we need to be. So I would love to have shared that. I enjoy talking about whiskey. And that's just, there's some really cool tie-ins there, but that's probably something I would have liked to have added.
Yeah. How have you guys seen that in your life? That this, you talked about this idea that in kingdom economics you gain by losing. You shared a pretty dramatic story of your, moving across the ocean. How have you guys seen that proven true in your life, that you've gained by losing? What's that look like for either of you?
Yeah. Honestly, like with any trial, I feel like looking back, you're like, oh yeah, I would go through that again to like have the same outcome, to have learned what I learned. When you're going through it, you never feel that way.
Nope.
So I feel like, first of all, that's really normal. But I guess like for me, my dad left our family when I was like 12 or 13.
Yeah.
Maybe I was 11. I don't even remember. But, obviously that was like devastating at the time. But to look back now and see how much my family actually grew closer together and learned more, and with like the leadership of my mom and pushing us more towards Jesus, like that was to the benefit of my whole immediate family.
Wow.
Like that was actually a good thing because we grew closer together and closer to God. Not immediately, but it takes time. Yeah. Years.
Yeah, like genuinely, like I said, it created this for my journey. It took, and to some degree, I'm still learning it. Like I'm by no means like there, never will be. But that process of figuring out like what is good of this, like what is, it's so hard to see past the pain because the pain is visceral.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I could say the analogy. So like I left the barrel of Chicago and we came to Rochester. So I lost a lot of friends. Took years to build up close friendships that 2 years into being in Rochester, I still don't feel like I've got that. So I'm like, you know what? I've gone through this before. I'm in a slightly different culture now. Like I know relationships take time. So like I'm kind of prepared for it. So the journey from Glasgow to Chicago was a lot harder than going from Chicago to Rochester. But it's still a sense of like losing something.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, I think like the distance that I had with God, I'm still, honestly, over the last like year has been different. Like prayer and reading my Bible, there's still this sort of like hesitation of intimacy with Him.
Because of the hurt.
Because of the hurt.
Yeah.
That I'm having to like relearn what it means to be close to Him again. Because I feel like to get to that point, like where I shared of like, I was in a really good spot, really growing spot in Glasgow. And then it was like, boom, this is really tough. This is like, God, what on earth are you doing?
Right.
That wrongly or immaturely of me, I was like, God, is this what you do? So I'm having to unlearn that behavior to reapproach Him.
And it makes sense too. I mean, we expect, like, God is so generous and gracious to us that typically when we obey, especially when we feel like, man, I'm taking this big risky step of obedience, like I kind of expect to be blessed in a way that I feel like it's blessing, right?
Right.
We say that, but honestly, that I think I have a bit of a gripe with when people are like, just invite Jesus into your heart and everything's going to be sunshine and roses. That's kind of the presentation of it. Everything's going to be smooth sailing. And it's not like what we're trying to say is like your life with Jesus is like heartache and pain. I mean, we can expect that, but it's also the beauty and growth that comes from that is far exceeds what we would without Him.
Yeah, and that verse, with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. Possibly one of the like most out of context quotes people use. Like you can do anything, but really it's about maturation and growth and even being able to come into the kingdom of God. Like, I think also the point of the parable is you can be a bad person your whole life, and then you can receive Christ, and it's your reward in heaven is just as good as if I received Christ at like 3 years old or whatever. It's unfair. But I don't know. That was maybe a sidetrack conversation totally.
No, there's times where I think part of my wrestle is like, why does it seem like other people have it so easy? Like Carly and I now, like, so we just got back from Scotland like a month ago, and really wrestling through just like this, we have a household of two worlds coming together, which, yeah, that's cool. There's a lot of cool things about that. There's also a lot of like tension with that. It's like really a lonely journey of like, how do we navigate this? We want our boys to know and have a relationship with both sides and take the best of both worlds. But that's deeply complicated. And so it's hard sometimes because you look at other people and you're like, oh, they've been, we joke around with Rochester, like, you know, the opening scene in Moana, where there's a song where it's like, we come from the island and no one leaves. Like, that's Rochester. We're like, no one leaves. People kind of are gravitated back. I'm like, man, that would be lovely. To be rooted that long in a place, that sounds really nice.
Yeah.
There is a flip side to it, though.
Totally.
Is a lot of people leave. And you are like, am I just going to stay here and watch everyone leave? Like, I mean, there's like, you know, grass is always greener.
Yeah.
But like everyone has their things. And it's easy to look at someone else's life and say, that looks like sunshine and rainbows and that must be really nice.
Yeah.
You know, without like, like we all have our things that are, our caskets. What are they called?
Casks.
We'll all have our caskets too.
But that's the comparison thing that I think that Jesus is talking about here. He's like, yeah, Peter, you guys are going to like sit on like 12 thrones judging, and anyone who's left brothers, like anyone who else does these things to follow me will receive 100-fold. It's like we look at one another and be like, well, so if that's what he gets, like, what do you? And he just flips it. Like he flips our understanding of like, you can't just look at someone that comes at the 5th hour of the day and be like, oh, how come they get the same as me? Like that's not what we are called to do and view things.
And
Right.
I heard you say a little bit earlier, before we were recording, that like we tend to look at the rich young ruler with condemnation, when maybe we really ought to look at him with compassion. Here's a guy who actually is asking the right question. But is just stuck because his identity is so wrapped up in the things he had. But you said there might be more to the story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we look at him, as we kind of look at Bible stories, like, oh, he went away, he didn't do as Jesus asked, and kind of judge him a little bit on it. But the cool thing is that, so scholars, tradition, like, in the same way, like some Catholic traditions would have a name for the woman at the well. In the same way, scholars and different evidence would say that the rich young ruler was Barnabas from the New Testament, who was a Levite. He owned a field that he eventually sold, that we find out in Acts. That he goes and follows Jesus by testifying and witnessing of him with Paul. And so we think that that's the end of the story. And I know it's not conclusive, but to me, there's some hope in that we just don't see when it's like, and he went away sad.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not that. Even if it isn't Barnabas, it wasn't the end of the story. And I think that should give us a lot of encouragement of like, even though there's times where we're sitting on something, like for instance, I shared earlier that it drove a wedge or like distance between me and God. There's certain things I know that I have probably delayed in following him. Like, I know I'm supposed to pray more. I know that I'm supposed to read my Bible more. And the hope is that he's still calling us even later in the day. He's still calling us, even though you might have like gone away and not done what you asked in the first place. He's still calling us back. I think that's a huge encouragement.
I actually, like, before you said it was Barnabas, I realized he went away sad, which made me think he's sad because he's going to give up all of his possessions that he, like, loves and puts his hope in. I found that, like, kind of interesting. If he wasn't going to give up everything, he wouldn't be sad when he's leaving.
I hadn't thought about that.
And, yeah, I was like, And also it made me think, no matter how much we have, if our fixation is on possessions and things we can get, it will never be enough.
Right.
That's right.
That's really interesting and is really making me question it now. Of like, because it just says like, so he went away sad because he had great wealth.
Yeah.
And we kind of put two and two together, but at the same time, it could be actually a sense of grief that he actually, because he has great wealth, he knew what was required of him.
Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought, like, obviously that sadness is there for a reason, you know?
And it is like, it was, as much as there was a lot of excitement, me leaving Glasgow and like this big adventure that I thought I was going to have, it was really hard.
Yeah.
I remember writing my parents a letter apologizing for leaving because I felt bad. Like,
how old were you?
20. Well, when I wrote the letter, when I left.
When you left?
I was 22. Probably wrote the letter 23, 24.
Yeah.
I felt bad. Like, it's hard going back every year. And my dad, it took years for my dad to come to the airport.
Wow.
He was that caught that struggled with it.
I do feel like, you know, when we choose to take steps of obedience, we think we should get peace immediately. Like, confidence in what you're doing and immediate peace to know it's the right decision.
Right.
And I think that's very far from what you actually get. Like, stepping out in obedience is hard. And, like, you were met with, like, even harder things than you thought what you were doing. And so, like, you didn't have this insatiable peace.
I think there was peace for me in the decision to go.
In the decision to go, but afterwards, you're what am I doing here?
Right.
Like, why did I do this? Like,
right.
Yeah. Jenny Miller, our receptionist, is always like, everyone says you're going to have peace when you follow God's command, but like, I've never had that. Like, it's just insane anxiety.
I think that's where, when it is wrapped up in our security and identity, I think that anxiety, that lack of peace just reveals our immaturity. Now, it's normal. It's not to say that like, I'm feeling these things, therefore I'm in the wrong. No, it's perfectly natural, but it's the process, the painful process that I hate to say needs to happen.
Yeah.
Pain always has a purpose.
And that's that question that you asked, you forced us to wrestle with through the passage, that same question that the ruler asked, what do I still lack? And connecting that to this sense of identity and security, like that's what's been sticking with me is where am I placing my identity and my security? Where do I find that? Because it's often in things that aren't Jesus, right? It's my position, or it's how people view me, or my ability to lead, or it's my, skills at the whiteboard, or whatever it is, You
have great skills at the whiteboard.
And I've just been processing this in the last few minutes that God does give us great abilities, and He asks us to use the things He's given us for His kingdom, right? He blessed the rich young ruler with great wealth as a resource to be used for the kingdom.
Right.
And so it's not that like it's bad for us to be really good at things or to be in positions of authority, or none of that.
Or
is
of
bad.
great wealth,
right?
too.
None of that is bad. But it is. We do have to check ourselves and our motives and say, am I tying my identity and my security to this thing, or am I using this thing that God has given me for Him?
Right.
Like, is this for me, or is it for him?
I think what's interesting about that, when he asks, what do I lack? Now, I said, like, in earthly economics, it's all about accumulating, winning, achieving, that kind of piece of it. So I think he's asking in that vein of, like, what do I need to get? What do I need to accumulate? And Jesus turns it of, like, no, you need to let go. And I think probably a good first step, rather than just, like, what do I need to learn? What do I need to accumulate or conquer even, is like, what do I need to let go of? And then one of the telltale signs I think that we see is, like, if we're constantly erring on the side of what do I need to take, what do I need to get, it's actually the wrong side of the question. Like, the lacking is on the other side of accumulating. So, like, what you lack is knowing what it's like to not have these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think too, like, you have to ask God to reveal that to you. Like, I think that's kind of part of the parable, is he went to Jesus to say, what do I need? And he revealed it to him. Like, with man, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Like, God will reveal those things to you if you go to him and ask. Or I guess if you don't, you might just be in for a rude awakening.
I think there's a lot. I mean, it's not like we're saying, okay, you can't have wealth, you got to sell everything. Like, yeah, I already said that. Like, the call to sell everything and follow Jesus, it's not like we need to just all of a sudden put everything up for sale. But, or impoverish ourselves, like, just by having more pain or more poverty means that we'll be closer to Jesus. That's not the point. But I think I think we can hide behind that excuse sometimes of, like, yes, Jesus, and he didn't tell me anything. It's like, well, hang on a minute. You have a brain. You know actually more than you think of what is holding you back. He's probably already placed something on your heart, on your mind. Like, we were talking about your light phone. Yeah. And you're like, I know that I need to give this up. Whether that is God specifically saying that to you, or if it's a combination of your own wisdom of, like, I've realized that I'm no longer being present with God and others as much, so I'm going to change my phone. Like, that's huge. Like, that's not, that's choosing a form of pain for the sake of following Jesus.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, and even asking yourself, like, you know, if I lost this today, like, how would I feel? If I lost my position, if I no longer had, like, the same role, if I lost, I mean, even people, if I lost this person, would I still, like, want to serve and follow Jesus? Like, being honest with yourself, asking those tough questions, you can answer a lot of questions yourself, probably. If I lost all this today, like, where's my foundation?
It's almost too scary to ask,
Yeah.
which is why I think we should have empathy, to come back to the rich young ruler.
Yeah.
I think we should have it with empathy, because I think that we do the same thing, is it will kind of get close to the edge and then we'll be like, nope. No, that's too scary.
It is. It's scary. But God is so gentle with us. Like, that's what I found. Like, sometimes he's got to whack me, right?
Yeah.
But often he's just so gentle that I get to the point where I'm like, oh, that's too scary right now.
Yeah.
And I back off, and he's just so gentle to, like, keep drawing me in. And so, really, really thankful. This has been a really amazing discussion. I've got a lot more to think about and wrestle with God about now. We've got to ask God that question: what do I lack? And see where he takes us. So thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for joining us on the next version of A Little Better. Come back next week. We've got Jason DeGraff bringing us another parable about a rich guy.
Oh boy.
The rich man and Lazarus. So
if you would like to give to Northridge.
so make sure you come back next week. Thanks, everybody.